I quit my job entirely and went into acting. And so my resume was just at this point, I'd been working for a few years and I had never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years. And now I was quitting entirely to go into acting. And so in my mind, I was like, oh my God, it's me. I'm the problem, I'm the flaky one, and I'm never gonna get hired by anybody again because they're gonna think that I'm just not capable of staying at a company for longer than a year, so why would anyone wanna hire me?
Let's be honest, life would be a whole lot easier if it came with a checklist or, my favorite, a spreadsheet. Do this by 25, achieve this by 40. But we all know life doesn't work like that. This is Unpopular Decisions, where we're having honest conversations about what it really takes to stop following the script. I'm your host, Jameelah Calhoun. At some point, a lot of us realize that the cool job isn't actually that cool, and the perfectly linear resume doesn't actually exist. Today, I'm joined by Megumi Calver, founder of Merobebe, who walked away from startup and corporate life after realizing that what was framed as opportunity was really just burnout dressed up as ambition. In this episode, we're demystifying the myth that startups automatically lead to success and wealth. And we're normalizing the reality that building a meaningful career often looks choppy before it looks impressive. If you've ever looked at your resume and thought, how am I going to explain this? This episode is for you. Let's get into it. Hi, Megumi. Thanks so much for being on Unpopular Decisions. I've been following your journey with Merobebe, and it's been so inspiring to watch. So thank you so much for joining us.
So
Um,
excited to be here.
Thank you. But before we dive into everything that we want to learn about you and your journey, can you tell us your name and what unpopular decision you made?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Megumi Calver, and my unpopular decision is that I quit the startup grind and corporate life to become an entrepreneur.
I know so many people are going to like clock into this one because I mean, this is of the moment. This is the zeitgeist. Like, there's so many things happening with layoffs and just people questioning, like, what does it mean to make your identity something beyond just what you do for a living? So,
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you're sharing this story with us. But maybe before we start going into your entrepreneurial side of your life. I think a lot of people are always curious about like the path into corporate. Like
Right.
what what did you think startup life was going to give you when you like signed up? Cuz they make a lot of promises.
Right. They sure do. So I had worked at smaller companies before. I had worked at a huge corporate company and then I had worked at small companies, but not necessarily a startup. And so when I finally got the opportunity to work at a startup, startups are just glamorous and sexy to work at. And I lived in the Bay Area and had been surrounded by people who were working at startups, but also kind of startups that had gone beyond and turned into Google or Airbnb or Twitter or, formerly known as Twitter and whatnot. So when I got the opportunity to work at a startup, I was like, this is going to be a great learning experience. This is going to be my opportunity to be on that sexy rocket ship going up. And I got equity in the company. I was the first hire, so on and so forth. So I was just very, very excited to be able to sort of check that box of like, I've had that experience.
Yeah, there's so much mythology around it in our culture right now. One, you're working with this founder genius who like came up with this amazing idea. I think there's also, at least in my life, the idea of like, oh, I'm gonna retire off of a big IPO
Mhm.
and set myself
Yep.
up forever. Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like all of that played a role for you. But you mentioned a few different career pivots, like you were at big companies, small companies. What were you taught about, people who made these types of changes in their career?
For context, I graduated college in 2012. And so at that time, it was very much career hopping. We didn't have the word career pivoting, right? Like you were just career hopping or job hopping. And I felt at least what I had heard and seen was that you were not being loyal. And this already wasn't the days, right, of people working at the same company for 50 years. That wasn't the expectation, but there was still some expectation of like, well, you should be at the job for a few years. So my first job out of college when I lived in New York was at Showtime Networks, huge company, right? And I was the marketing coordinator. My boyfriend at the time got a job at a startup. He was the first employee at a startup in the Bay Area. And so we moved to San Francisco. That was after about a year and a half at my first job. And so at least that one had an explanation, right? Of I wasn't just leaving to leave, I was leaving because I was literally moving across the country. And then while I was there, I really didn't like the team. It was sort of I scrambled to get a job so I could move. And it was a long commute. It wasn't actually in the city. And then I found another job. So I wasn't even at that company for a year before I went to another big ad agency. And then after I was there for less than 2 years, again, I think it was a little over like about a year and a half, I quit my job entirely and went into acting. And so my resume was just at this point, I'd been working for a few years and I had never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years. And now I was quitting entirely to go into acting. And so in my mind, I was like, oh my God, it's me. I'm the problem, you know? I'm the flaky one, and I'm never gonna get hired by anybody again because they're gonna think that I'm just not capable of staying at a company for longer than a year, so why would anyone wanna hire me?
I remember that feeling too. Like, I will say I've been a little bit of a job hopper myself. And yeah, you always feel the need to come up with the right story for that interview and getting that question and just feeling like you're going to be judged for it so much. But before maybe we go back there, you mentioned acting. I'm like, "Er," like
Yes, the most career pivots of career pivots.
yeah. So tell us about that moment. What inspired you and how did that kind of land with maybe people in your life at that point in time?
So I had been the person, right? Like I went to NYU, which was obviously in the city, and so it was really easy for me to intern. And that's actually why I wanted to go to NYU because I don't know, I went to boarding school. I was like, I'm ready to be done with college. I'm ready to be a real adult, you know? So I felt like I had spent all this time trying so hard to enter the corporate world so then when I decided to leave the corporate world, not to go to a startup or even go to like start my own company or anything like that, to go to acting, I definitely I think everyone was surprised. My parents were like, "Oh, are you doing this while you study for your GMATs and then you're gonna go to business school?" So, there was definitely some confusion and concern, I think, coming in. And then, my boyfriend at the time and I broke up, and everyone was like, "What is happening with Megumi right now?"
Oh man, yeah. I mean, some of the biggest kind of transformation moments though are those moments where you like surprise the people around you and it's like, don't put me in a box. Like
Well, I think that
yeah.
was the thing. I had like I said, I had intern every semester, right? And I had always done what I was supposed to do. And so quitting my job to do acting of all things was so I was always in like my box, right? And so I think that was part of it of I needed to do something completely different. And that's how I ended up in acting and partly too like I said at this point I was in the Bay Area and I missed all my friends in New York. I just wanted to find community, wanted to do something fun that I liked and kind of stumbled into an acting class thinking that it would be like a couple months workshop or something like that, and found a really great community of people who were very supportive. And I don't know, I kind of fell into it from there. And next thing you know, I'm quitting my job so that I could do a play, and then I'm moving to LA.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, for people who are just, always tempted to go to that improv class or that acting class, like, don't think it's just going to be for a moment. I mean, look at your story. You're like, I'm
I
just
know
going
it's
to do this every
dangerous.
other Saturday. It'll be a little hobby. And
I
then,
do
yeah, change your whole
I do
life.
think that I do think that everyone should do improv, whether you don't care about acting or you're like, "I work in marketing, I don't need this." Improv is so terrifying, but even in my class that I ended up taking when I moved to LA, there were a few people who worked in corporate who were like, "We just wanted to try it out," and I found it so, so valuable. So if you don't
Ooh.
take anything else away from this, but just try out an improv class. You don't have to be an improv actor, whatever, comedian, just try improv.
Well, a gem right there. Write that down, everyone. I love that advice. I mean, I could also imagine though, so you said you found this amazing sense of community with people in the acting world, in film and television, et cetera. I could just imagine leaving that community again to go back into corporate, which you did do eventually with your startup experience, might have also been difficult. What was kind of going through your head at that moment to make you say, this may not be where I want to stay forever? And how did that impact your sense of community or the people around you at that point?
So at that point, I was living in LA and, full on acting. I had my restaurant server job. I had worked at a wine store and taking acting classes. I had an agent and a manager and going to auditions. And I was at the time dating my now husband who works in production. And so I felt like my whole life was very much people in film and TV, as it is when you live in LA. And I realized though that acting is one, it's extreme freelancing. You get a call from your agent saying, "Hey, can you be on the other side of town for an audition in 2 hours?" And then the callback might be tomorrow or the next day. And then they're shooting maybe next week in Ohio and you just can't plan. Um, and so there's also very much a feast and famine type thing of you could be working all summer and that's really good, or you can have nothing. I knew people who had booked something big and they were like, I'm set. This is my takeoff point, and then didn't book anything for years. So I'm a planner. I like my spreadsheets. And so already that was hard for me. And then thinking about what is this going to look like? I wanna have a family. What kind of life will this be for myself, for my family? And realizing I didn't love it enough to do that. And I joked with my friends that really, I just needed therapy. I needed to go to a place where people were like, "It's okay to cry. We need you to be angry. You need to be angrier. You need to be more sad. You need to feel more things." Like, that's what I needed. I not that I didn't care about acting, I had fun, right? And I found this community and I had a great time, and I learned so much about storytelling, but what I really needed was a therapist. And so when I made that realization, I left, but obviously it took a long time to find another job because at this point I had been out of the job market for 3 years or so, and already it was hard to quit my job to go into acting, and I felt like a total failure maybe to then say, so you know how I quit everything to go into acting? I'm actually now gonna quit acting and go back to corporate life." And I felt like I was disappointing friends who had supported me and who had said, "Oh my god, Megumi, you're so brave for quitting your corporate job and doing something like acting, and I'm so proud of you for pursuing your passions." And then for my parents too, who had kind of accepted that their daughter had left the corporate life and had gone into acting, they were like, "Well, are you sure you want to go out? Like, is this a financial issue? Is this why are you wanting to go back into the real world? And then to be interviewing in the real world and being like, oh, so I was acting and then, but now I'm coming back. Please take me. And then my acting friends who were like, oh, so you're quitting, and I was like, I'm not quitting. I just don't want to do this anymore. But I that's kind of how I felt. And so it was a really hard decision. I cried many times for sure.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many threads. And I'm just like putting notes because we're going to come back to a few of them because I think this idea of do you love it enough is like so important. We're going to talk about your journey in startups. We're going to talk about your journey as an entrepreneur. Both of those are really times where you have to commit to something really fully. And like, if the passion isn't there, like, you really have to sit with that. And then you also just talked about this idea of like the right to change your mind. Even if you do something at one point that was right for you, doesn't mean you have to stay on it and stay committed forever. Because I'm sure there are people listening who maybe took a big leap and are now maybe questioning, like, is this where I want to pour everything into indefinitely? And feeling like you just got to stay the path. So I love that on multiple occasions you pivoted the path.
I think there's also a sunk cost fallacy type of situation where I'm like, well, at least when I quit my marketing job, the first time I quit corporate life and went into acting, didn't feel like I had put too much time in. I was still young, right? I'm not really thinking about that. I'm like, I have all the time in the world. I'm never going to change my mind again. I wasn't 25 yet. My frontal cortex was not fully developed yet, So I pivoted, but then quitting acting to go back into marketing, part of what was running through my mind was, 1, I haven't been in the marketing game for, 3, 4 years, so I have lost out on that experience, right? Everyone else had moved on, and I was still stuck/behind, and also I had put all this money and time and energy and focus into acting. Even if I don't love it, I don't hate it, I don't dislike it. Do I really want to, in my mind, waste all of that time was one of the ways I was thinking about it then.
Oh my God. Yes. The sunk cost fallacy. So I majored in economics in undergrad. And I just remember that being like an aha, like, like kind of moment.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
for those who aren't familiar, it's the idea that to make decisions based on what your enjoyment or the value you're going to get out of something going forward versus looking at the time or value spent in the past. Because if it's already spent, it doesn't change the situation for you going forward. So you should mostly think about, will I actually value this at a forward looking perspective versus looking at any costs or investment that you've made in it in the past. And we all know, and I know you guys listening are feeling this, like the brain doesn't work like this. Like,
No,
also our
no.
parents don't work like that. They don't think like maybe while we're thinking about decisions and making those right choices, would love to play a little game. This is Would You Rather?
'Kay.
And this is just another way for us to get to know you. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this intro, you're now an entrepreneur in the wine space. So I want to hear more about your wine taste, really,
Okay,
with
okay.
this.
Don't judge me, guys.
Box wine is valid. So, like, we're
It
gonna
is,
see.
it is. Don't let them tell you otherwise.
Love it. Hot take right out of the gate. Okay, so a couple trendy wines that are out there right now:
Okay.
orange wine or
Mhm.
natural wine.
Well, orange wine tends to be natural wine, but and
Hmm.
natural wine is such a big variety, and I gotta be honest, I'm not into that funky kombucha, cloudy natural wines. I know people love it, and I'm happy that they do, and I'm happy it's made. It's just not for me. So if we're talking about, like, those kind of natural wines, I would go orange wines, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I hear you. Some the new trends sometime I'm like, like to some extent, we perfected winemaking over millennia. So let's
I
maybe
heard someone yeah, I heard
learn
someone,
from those things.
say yeah, someone said that, "Oh, so basically natural wine is they started making the wine and then they didn't finish making the wine." And I do wanna be clear, everyone, not all natural wine is like that. There are some clear, more traditional looking, smelling, tasting natural wines, so don't turn your nose up at all natural wines. It's a broad
Yes,
range.
yes, exactly. Okay, well, also another wine one,
'Kay.
Bordeaux or Napa? And you can answer this both from like a
Bordeaux.
v okay. Immediate. I love
Immediate.
it. Okay, tell us more, tell
Next.
us more.
Um, oh man, I my issue with Napa is that it has become such a big name that I feel that not always, but they can often be overpriced. And a lot of times they lean too heavy into the oak. And so you get these like big vanilla oak cabs, which I just don't like. But that's why I answered so quickly. No hate to Napa
Okay.
wines. I love some wonderful independent small wineries in Napa.
Yes, yeah, well, we don't love the private equity,
Yeah.
corporate
Yes.
wine operations, that are
Yes.
definitely big out there, so I get it. Well, speaking of private equity,
Mm.
another well, slightly different, but another would you rather, especially because you were in the Bay Area for quite some time. So, would you rather work the 996 schedule at a startup with tons of buzz? And for those who don't know, 996 is this new all the rage with the youth in SF that's working an intense 6-day a week schedule from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So context. But yes, would you rather work 996 at a startup, tons of buzz, it's the new wave, or 9 to 5 at a like very no name business materials company? Just, yeah.
An unsexy job.
Yes.
I am too old to be doing that 996 life. I'm 30 how old am I? I'm 35. I don't got that kind of time. I don't got that kind of energy. I will happily
Right.
work 9 to 5 at a more boring job, but then I would be doing something on the side though.
True,
Yeah.
true.
Even if it might not even be, for money, like, not I don't mean like a side hustle necessarily, but I would do the 9 to 5 so I can do something else that I enjoy doing in my own time.
Yeah, people talk about the 5 to 9 shift,
Yes,
which is,
yes.
pouring into your passions. But yeah, I
Or
don't know what's
sleeping. I
happening.
also like sleeping, so there's that too.
We love that. And the people need sleep. Gen Z, like millennials, we really
Yes.
tried to set y'all up for success. Like,
I
you should not
know.
be trying to work this hard. Like, why?
I mean, I
um,
know the economy is not great, so we all gotta
it's
work, but
fair. Yeah. No,
but we
it's
don't need to be
true.
hustling for shareholder value, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. Speaking of shareholder value, would love to maybe turn back to this moment where you're deciding to go back into corporate and really kind of having a departure from this life you had really built. You even found love on with someone in the film industry, so you were really in it. What story did you have to tell in order to make that pivot?
So I literally started when I finally got back into, marketing life, I started on March 1st of 2020. So it could not have been better timing because the restaurant I worked at closed. Obviously, no one was filming anything. But point being that it was long ago enough that there wasn't this whole like people weren't putting career gaps on their LinkedIn, you know? That was not a thing at all. I had done some freelance marketing work, and so I was just really leaning heavily on that. I was leaning heavily on my experiences in production that were not in front of the camera. So talking about like organization and detail oriented and storytelling, like doing anything I could to make it seem like, and not that I did it, but, really bumping up those transferable skills from production acting into the marketing world. And I got lucky in that I found a job at a company that does the North American marketing for Japanese companies. And so I was able to lean on my Japanese background and my Japanese language skills to get that job. But honestly, it was truly a struggle. It took me so long to find a job. I would even have interviews and have second round interviews, and then someone with an MBA would get the job. And so I there was definitely a time where I was like, this is not gonna happen for me. Like I can't, I just have to keep acting because there's no other choice.
How long was that journey?
Yeah, so I honestly think it was about almost 6 months because I think I officially like quit acting around October, and so we were kind of in that fall-ish area, and then like I said, my last week at the restaurant was February, and then March 1st was my first day at the new job, and I was there for a week before we all went home. So that was also very lucky in that, like, I got the job then before I don't know what I would have done if it had taken any longer and people just stopped hiring.
Yeah, well,
So
divine
I got very
timing.
lucky. Yeah, very, very
There
lucky.
yeah, yeah. Okay, but so you were at this marketing company and at some point you decided to join a startup. What I guess number 1, you mentioned your boyfriend when you were in SF was also at a startup. What were some of the maybe outcomes that you saw other people having from their experiences at startup that made you feel like this is actually an attractive next step for me and what I want to do?
The people I knew often were working at more established startups. Like, my boyfriend at the time was, I think, the only person I knew who was, like, the first employee somewhere, right? Um, and even that, I would say, was not a great experience for him. And so the universe was trying to tell me maybe that this ain't for you, but I didn't listen. And I very stubbornly was like, but I want to have this experience for myself. And also, on top of that, the marketing job I had was not great. And so I think I was just sort of desperate to get out of that as well anyway. And so when this opportunity came along, they're like, you're going to be our first employee, you'll be head of marketing. I was just super excited and was like, this is amazing. I thought, because, I was also the mentality of like, I had tried so hard just to get a job, any job after acting. And so to be able to have this opportunity to work at a startup that was, co-founded by an MIT grad and so on and so forth, I was like, this is it. This is my chance.
Oh man, I'm just relating so much this idea of like the universe trying to send you signs and you're just like, "What? No." Like not wanting to see it. But also like how much especially after having seasons of scarcity or being kind of unsure to then get dangled this beautiful carrot of a big title um and equity, which sounds really cool. Like all of that can be part of, what maybe lowers our, tuning in to our own intuition.
Mhm.
Because you start looking at those other external aspects. How long were you at this startup before you were like, I'm not sure this is exactly what I was expecting?
It was pretty soon that I was like, "Hmm," but I also understood, right, like, we were a small team. This was still pre-vaccines, and so I was like, "Things are just weird right now," and I've been out of the marketing loop for so long, and I had never worked at a startup before, so I was like, "Maybe this is just it is what it is?" Um, and I was also the only woman. It was in a male-dominated industry, and I was the only woman for a long time, maybe for a full year, maybe more, and so that also was part of it. I think there were just all these different things that made me feel like, "Oh, I think I'm whether I'm overreacting or I'm just not used to it or it's just different," And so it wasn't until maybe my 2nd year or around that time that I was like, "Okay, this is enough is enough."
What was the catalyst at that moment?
There are many different things, but I think the lack of appreciation was one of the big things. And to your, 996 point, we were working often 6 days a week, in office, and my commute, for anyone who's lived in LA, we know the commute is really long. I was driving an hour each way to go to work, and so honestly, the Saturdays were kinda nice because I didn't have to drive, an hour because there was less traffic, and, it wasn't 6 days a week every single week, but we were working a lot, and then we were being told that we weren't dedicated enough. We all took pay cuts, and we were told we were not dedicated enough, or there was just a lack of appreciation, and the culture wasn't great, and I also experienced, being the only woman, any, like, team happy hours, mostly I organized, and I remember one time I went home to Japan for a couple weeks, came back, and there was just a pile of dishes in the sink because none of the boys did the dishes, and finally I was like, "Guys, like, I cannot be the only person doing dishes," and after that, I stopped doing a single dish. I was like, "Nope, I'm not touching any of these." But I think that was the thing. If I was working a lot, even if I wasn't getting paid, even if I took a pay cut, but they were like, "We appreciate the work you're doing. We see that you're working hard. We see that you're dedicated." It would have been one thing, but to be in honestly kind of a toxic environment where people are shouting and yelling at each other, and then to be told, "Well, we need to fix the culture, so you guys should stop being late," was one of the solutions. And I was like, "This is not." I and again, though, I stayed because of equity. And so I had hit my 1-year cliff, but I was still vesting because it was a 4-year vest, like typical. And in addition, some of the pay cuts we took were for additional equity as well. And so I really, really wanted to try to make that work. And I also wanted to stay to try and help make that equity worth something, right? Because to this day, right now, it does it's not worth anything. Um, and so I was like, if I can stay and help steer the ship in some direction to make the time, sunk cost fallacy, the time I've spent, the equity that I have vested worth something, that would be great. But obviously that did not happen.
I had to take a deep breath because the like we all feel that rage of like
Yeah.
unappreciation, of having, those carrots dangled in front of you, the kind of people wanting you to be mission driven towards
Mhm.
something that maybe you're not actually that passionate about. All of those, I know for people who've been through a toxic work situation can really feel in their spirit right now.
I do say
um,
I felt good. Not good, but I was like, "Okay, I made the right decision after I left." The person they hired to replace me quit after 2 months, and so I was like, "Okay, this was not." 'Cause that was also, I think, part of what was making me waver in my decision making, is that I felt like I had been a quitter my whole life, right? I kept quitting after a year of working here, or I was flaky or something. And so then to once again be after a year, I made it past 2 years at this point. I think I was there for almost 3 years. And so to quit, quote unquote quit again, I was like, "Oh my god, like I am the worst. I am the flakiest mother effer on the planet."
Ooh, I mean, the way that the thoughts that we have about ourselves can really impact our choices is huge. Was that idea of like being a quitter something that was a family value? Did you feel like it was just society at large? Like, where did that piece about being a quitter is inherently awful, and not something you want to be like settling for you? Like, where did that come from?
In Japanese, we have this word gaman, and gaman is like to withstand something. Like something is very frustrating, or let's say something is painful, right? Like you're getting bandaged up and it really, really hurts. And so they're like, "Gaman, like you can do it. Just steel yourself," basically. So that is a Japanese concept of just like hold it in, steel yourself, "Gaman, you can do it." And so maybe in a terrible work situation, someone might say, "Oh, but like you're so close, just gaman, you're almost there." Um, so I think that is part of it. And I think, like I said, at that time, the whole career pivots and people writing on their LinkedIn or in their resumes, career gap. And not that, I understand that it's still not this massively celebrated thing of where I'm sure people who are interviewing are not like, oh my God, I'm so happy to see that you had a career gap. But it was not even a thing that you would talk about. And so I think sort of all of the things combined, my own Japanese culture and just general work culture of you do not job hop. That is not a thing you do. You stay and you prove yourself, and then you stay at least 2 or 3 years, and then you move on too.
Yeah, there is such a pride in so many communities, especially communities where either from culture or having been maybe underrepresented in certain environments, that there is a pride around endurance,
Mhm,
and we shall overcome is like,
mhm.
definitely a very important saying in Black American culture. And it's hard when you get to a stage where you're like, well, I don't want to just endure. I want to thrive. I want
Right.
to, elevate. I want to be happy. And when those two things come into tension with each other, I know it's so hard to kind of retrain yourself not to just see endurance and suffering as almost a badge of honor.
Yeah, and I think too, I almost didn't trust myself because I was like, maybe this is just what it's like, and I haven't experienced it, and that's why I think it's not good or not tolerable or not right, but maybe I'm wrong, right? And so I had that self-doubt too, which is partly why seeing other people quit before and after me was like, "Oh, okay, so it's not just me." So there was that validation, which was very helpful.
Right. Well, of course, you've also mentioned that a big part of this decision also was tied up in your financial livelihood. Taking a pay cut, you mentioned earlier, is a huge bet and risk to take on a company and in your work situation. What was your kind of calculation at the time that made you comfortable with that?
So they offered all of us equity in exchange for a pay cut. And to be fair, the co-founders had already taken a pay cut. And I think one was not getting paid at all. And there was a sense of it's going to be for X number of months, right? Like less than a year, maybe 6 months or something. And a range of like you can take, obviously they didn't expect anyone to be like, I won't take any pay, no pay. But I took more of a pay cut than any other employee did. In exchange, I got more equity. And I, obviously talked to it was at the time my fiance. We were planning our wedding and we had decided, we believe in this company. We believe in the co founders. We believe that this is a good business. And sure, if it's gonna be for, this X number of months, that's fine. We can do it. Um, and so that was the thinking. And then, of course, we had our wedding, and then the X number of months passed, and I kept asking, and nothing happened. And I think that was when it was kind of insult on top of injury to be like, well, you're just not dedicated enough. Sometimes you show up 5 minutes late, and we need you to work harder and we need you to show up on time and you need to be here all the time and be more invested. And I was like, I am literally invested. Like I took a bigger pay cut for more equity to help the company. How like what are you talking about? So that was extremely frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess as you think about your decision making or ability to think of your career, eh, how much do you think about what could have helped you make some of these choices sooner? And I'm saying this because I'm hoping people can learn from your experience. I went through this myself, leaving a job that similarly, I just wanted to stay into the end of a big project I was trying to launch. And then it became, oh, well, the stock went down. So let me stay and be a part of bringing it back up. And there are just all these ways that you can rationalize staying longer. So yeah, I wonder for you as you look back on the experience, like what do you think about ways that could have gotten you to the choices sooner?
I don't know if I could have done my, quit marketing, go into acting, back into marketing sooner. I don't know what that would have been like. But in terms of my mistakes post acting, getting back into the marketing world, I made the mistake of sacrificing my own worth, and I don't mean, just like, oh, my time or my energy, but literally my net worth, right? Like my paycheck for someone else, and I would not do that again. I would always put me first. And I'm not saying never make any sacrifices or never compromise, but I think especially when it comes to work, you are the one that cares about you at the end of the day, so you gotta take care of yourself before you put your own oxygen mask on first before you put someone else's oxygen mask on, and so if there's and I don't want people to take this as don't take risks, right? Because what if the company did really, really well and now I have extra equity and I'm loaded and I can retire? But I think there could be more of a middle ground, and in addition, trusting your gut instincts of when something doesn't feel right, just because everyone else says it's right, doesn't mean it's right. And I'm not saying, ignore what everyone else says, but kinda keep an eye on that at least.
Right. Well, I mean, to some of what you're talking about, I think I saw a stat that it's less than 10% of startup employees ever see any meaningful upside from equity. So
Yeah.
it is really playing the lottery to some
Yeah.
extent. And, I think if you keep that in mind, it makes what you're saying even more clear. Like you have to think of yourself and your own happiness, what's actually fueling you when you're thinking about things like equity and will it actually pan out? People don't talk about it, but start asking people around you. Most
'Cause
people,
everyone
it does
talks,
not pan out. Yeah.
yeah, you hear about, like, the chef who worked at Google who made so much money because he was partially paid in equity, right? You hear about other people who had worked at these startups that became extremely wealthy, but there are the majority of us who have equity in a piece of paper that is worth nothing.
Right. Right. I mean, speaking finances, though, you did eventually decide to quit and
Mhm.
found your business, which really materially changes your financial situation in terms of, of course, having a steady paycheck, but also the investment you have to make to build a business.
Right.
How did you maybe think about preparing yourself financially for that next part of your journey when you decided you were ready to leave?
That was the only reason why I stayed for so long. I even went down to part-time, because I did get a couple freelance marketing clients, and so I went down to part-time, and the other thing, right, in the United States is your health insurance is tied to your corporate job, and so that was a huge, huge thing that we had to consider, um, and I think ultimately it was kind of lucky in that we were talking about moving to Kansas City from LA, and so I wouldn't have been able to stay at that startup anyway, and I needed to find a new job, and we were just kinda like, "Look, Kansas City is cheaper. We're moving here to be closer to his family, and so let's just, I don't know, wing it." so to speak. And so we did kind of just wing it. And I got very lucky in finding some freelance marketing clients that helped me kind of transition out of a full time, you know, job, if that makes sense. So a real job, a 9 to 5 or 996 job.
Again, don't do it. Yeah, 996. Um, but, I think it's so real that, again, with the context of healthcare in the US, but also what it really takes to finance taking a leap. A lot of people think you do it all at once, but there are so many ways into entrepreneurship of, maybe like you said, the 9 to 5 and then the 5 to 9, kind of doing it after work. You tried part time, freelance, client work. There's so many different ways to kind of give yourself a little bit of runway. And I think, yeah, it's great that you were able to have that as you were making the transition. I mean, it sounds like your partner, of course, was incredibly supportive of you as you were making that decision. But oftentimes, it is a family decision to leave a job to make this type of shift. I guess one, what were the conversations that you guys were having at this point, and then were there any people in your life at this point that maybe were less clear or less supportive of your decision to really break away from corporate life in this way?
I think everyone had seen how miserable I was. It was affecting me physically at this point, being at the startup. And so it was very clear that I had to get out of there. The question was more, how do I get out of there? And I have a couple friends who are also freelance. And so they, for example, helped me. Uh, like they brought me on to sort of help them with their work. I luckily, word of mouth got a couple more clients. And so it was truly just, again, very lucky in being surrounded by people were supporting the decisions I was making. And we, I think, also lucky in that we weren't planning on staying in LA. I think if we were staying in LA, I would have just looked for another full-time job in LA and just kinda stuck it out until I could find one. But because we were moving to Kansas City, which, is significantly cheaper, and at the time, my husband's work situation was kind of changing a little bit too, and so we were sort of in a full family transitional phase, and so I think that also helped us to be like, "Well, let's just take a leap and see what happens."
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to call out geographic mobility can be a part of your plan
Yeah,
when you're trying to decide and how the math is going to work.
yeah. Yep.
So it's great that you guys were able to make that bigger transition together. You, of course, after you left, have now founded Merobebe, and I'd love to hear more about how that idea came up and when you decided to commit to that path. Because it sounds like you were freelancing as well, but yeah, what was kind of the passion and inspiration behind your business?
So I love wine, obviously. And my dad actually was a very prolific whiskey writer when I was growing up in Japan. And so he clearly likes not just drinking whiskey but like really getting into it. Him and my uncle were also very into wine. And so I kind of grew up being very interested in wine in that space. Whiskey tasted like fire to me, and so I didn't like it, but wine, I was like, "I like wine." So my dad was always like, "You should become a somm, you should become a somm," and I was like, "No, no, no, I work in marketing." So after I'm at this startup, I was like, I need to do something for myself." Like I said, it was a male-dominated industry, and it wasn't anything I was necessarily passionate about, and it wasn't a mission-driven company, and I just needed to do something that I liked and made me feel like I was contributing to the world a little bit, and not just to shareholder value. So I started Merobebe, and it started off as just me learning about wine, writing about wine, and interviewing women who work in wine. Because even though about 60% of American wine drinkers are women, less than 20% of winemakers and winery owners are women. And I was like, "Wouldn't it be cool if I did an event?" I don't know. Sounds fun. So I just it was kind of really random. I found a woman who I worked with, who is now a good friend of mine, Catherine Donatia, and she agreed to be a guest speaker. So she talked about inclusive leadership, and I had a winemaker there who talked about her wines, and we featured a couple other women wineries, and that was just kind of how this first event started. And I was like, "Oh, like, this is the way I wanna do it," of not just talking about wine and interviewing different women in wine, but truly using wine as a conduit to connect women and educate them and empower them and lift women up. But ultimately, the goal is to use wine as sort of the connecting thread for everything.
I love it. Yeah, and just the fact that you were able to turn an experience that maybe you felt kind of isolated in your womanhood and dealing with the sexism at work to now pouring back into women is incredible. Also, as we start to wrap here, you've taken many leaps, but what do you think people romanticize about maybe leaving corporate life that they should be more honest about?
We were told, "Pursue your passions and you'll never work a day in your life," and I think that's a bunch of BS. I think if you are lucky enough to do that, that's amazing, but you can pursue your passions and it's still work, right? You still have to pay your taxes and you still have to deal with accounting and hiring and logistics, and so I think if you are able to make money doing what you love, that's amazing. But more likely than not, there is going to be something you don't like. And I keep harping on this, but the health insurance and the PTO, the benefits you get, one, right? If you're even lucky enough to be at a company that has like a 401k match, you miss out on that. You miss out on honestly, health insurance is so expensive in this country, and so, I mean, even if you have great health insurance, it can be a freaking mess to deal with. So that's one thing, that you have to pay for and deal with. And then I just don't have PTO anymore. Like I told you, I'm flying to Europe tomorrow morning, but I'm still like I was able to push some meetings, and luckily I have some amazing clients who are very understanding, but I still have to there's still work that has to get done. It's not like there's a new temp or there's other team members to absorb the work I'm doing. If I don't do it, it doesn't get done. And so I think there is very much this idea of like, I'm gonna quit my corporate life and do what I want and have my own schedule. And yes, you do. I get to work when I want many of the times. I do get to, right? Like go to Europe without asking someone to approve my PTO, but it's still all it's still all you. It's all on you to deal with everything, the good and the bad.
Right. Yeah, there are so many elements to that. I'm on this entrepreneurial journey myself now, and I think one of the things people also say is, "Oh, I want to work for myself so I don't have a boss." And I'm like, "Your boss just changes. Like
Yep.
your bosses, your investors, your clients, if you have employees, you feel accountable to them to
Mhm.
make sure that you're showing up as the owner of a business that's providing them a livelihood. So your boss and who you're accountable just changes.
Yeah.
But there's no free lunch in
Yes,
this
there's no free
world.
lunch, there's no work happy hour.
Oh yes, no free office supplies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as people are hearing your story, many different career pivots, many learnings through your journey. What's maybe one through line or one takeaway that you've made for yourself as you reflect back on the entire journey that you've been on?
I think the thing I've learned is to trust myself more or how to trust myself more. And there's still a lot of negative self talk going on in here all the time. But I think because I've tried so many different things, there's kind of like a fuck it mentality of like, whatever. I've tried things and it hasn't worked and I've moved on, or I've tried things and I've worked and I've learned and moved on. It's not gonna kill me, right? And that definitely does get harder as I get older, and, I'm talking about starting a family, like, when I have another small human that I am financially and physically responsible for, I'm sure my decision making will change. But for now, I've learned to stop beating myself up about the career pivots because for a long time I was like, "Ah, if only I had started acting sooner because I did all that marketing stuff, and if only I just tried a little bit sooner, or I wish I had kept my job for longer so that I could have saved up more money and then I would have a smaller career gap, and why did I even do acting when I did," so I just it was just all this like sort of regrets. And now I truly kind of see the through line of how everything has led to where I am today. If I didn't act, I would have never worked at a wine store or as a server, and I wouldn't have learned so much about customer service. Everyone needs to work at a restaurant, by the way, at least once in their life. Um, I wouldn't have had that experience to be able to work in wine now. And I think trusting, I don't mean like, oh, trust the universe blindly. You have to make decisions for yourself. But I have learned to kind of trust my gut more and trust what I want to do and trust kind of just put in the work and hope I'm lucky again.
I love that. And thank you for, tying all of that together because I think that is such an important message of self trust. And that's what this show is all about. So, our final question: what would you say to the haters? The people who
Oh.
judge career hopping or changing your careers frequently without understanding the reality behind it.
I would say that I've lived so many lives in my one life. So I got to go to a lot of different places. I got to, meet so many different types of people through my different careers that I never would have thought I would be in an acting class when I was younger. I never would have. And if I had just, you know, stayed at my one job forever, I would have missed out on all of that. And I truly don't think I would have landed where I am today doing this work that I love doing. And getting to drink wine and pretend that I'm working, that's great.
Fantastic. Well, you would definitely win probably any fun fact competition because, yeah, you've had such an amazing journey. And thank you so much for sharing so much of your story with us and all those gems throughout the conversation. So, thank you so much for being on the pod.
Thank you so much. And everyone, go take that Improv 101 class.
Exactly. And of course, is there anything else that you want to make sure our audience is aware of? There's the Merobebe newsletter and
Yes.
events as well. But yeah, tell us if there's anything you want them to go check out.
Yeah. So if you like wine, follow me on Instagram at Megumi Calver. You can also go sign up for my newsletter. You can find it at the link in my Instagram or at merobebe.com. That's merobebe.com.
Awesome. All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
If this conversation hit home, don't ignore it. That discomfort, that curiosity, that's information. Make sure you're subscribed to Unpopular Decisions on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts for more honest conversations about choosing differently. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who's questioning their path right now. And if you're in New York, Megumi and I are taking this conversation offline soon. We'll be hosting a live event together in the next few weeks. Follow us on Instagram or check our website, unpopulardecisions.com, so you don't miss it. We're building something bigger than a podcast here. We're on a mission to spark 1 million courageous life choices. I'm glad you're here.